live on Zoom. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Alex. I'm with the Midtown Scholar Bookstore in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and we're delighted to be here virtually with you for this evening's program with Tyler Barton and Alex McElroy. First, just a huge thank you to all of our viewers, attendees, customers, friends, and everyone out there who is supporting indie bookstores. The challenges continue as we ramp up for the holiday season, but we're honored to be able to offer programming like tonight's event, especially for the celebratory book launch for Tyler's new book. And with that in mind, it's my honor to introduce our speakers here this evening. Alex McElroy is a non-binary author based in Brooklyn. Their debut novel, The Atmospherians, was named a New York Times Editor's Choice. Other writing appears in The Cut, BuzzFeed, GQ, Elle, Harper's Bazaar, The Atlantic, Tin House, and elsewhere. Alex has been named one of the Strand's 30 writers to watch and has received fellowships from the Breadloaf Writers Conference, the Tin House Summer Workshop, the Suwannee Writers Conference, the Imprint Foundation, the Elizabeth George Foundation, and the National Parks Service. Of course, our featured author this evening is Tyler Barton. Tyler is a literary advocate and co-founder of Fear No Lit, home of the Submerging Writer Fellowship. His fiction has appeared in the Iowa Review, Gulf Coast, Subtropics, and elsewhere. He's earned honors from Kenyon Review, the Chicago Review of Books, Phoebe Journal, Best of the Net, Best Microfiction 2020, and Best Small Fictions 2020. His collection of flash fiction, The Quiet Part Loud, was published by Split Lip Press in 2019. He lives in the Adirondacks. Of course, Tyler's new book that we're here for this evening. Here it is, beautiful cover. It's titled Eternal Night at the Nature Museum. I've got to read just one blurb. This one's from Daniel Handler, AKA Lemony Snicket, who writes, quote, startling, gritty, wistful, lonely, quick, sharp, hopeful, hopeful, hopeful. Yes, this is what you want to read, end quote. Some quick housekeeping before we get started. If you have a question, any question at all for Tyler, please use the Q&A button towards the bottom of the screen. It's below our faces here. We'd love to hear from you, so ask away at any point, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible towards the end of the program. And most importantly, if you would like to purchase a signed copy, yes, we have signed copies available of Eternal Night at the Nature Museum, please visit our website, midtownscholar.com, or simply look in the chat room to the right for a link in just a moment. That is the #1 way to support the author, the bookstore, and this event series. Again, signed copies available at the Midtown Scholar Bookstore. But now, without further ado, Alex McElroy and Tyler Barton.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex. I'll just hand it over to you, Tyler. We'll let you get this reading started.
Thanks so much. Thank you all so much for being here. This is really, like, I feel like writers say this all the time when their first book comes out, but this is really a dream come true. I've been writing short stories since I was in high school, and motivated by some very important teachers there at Dover Area High School. And I haven't stopped since. And this is kind of the culmination of about 5 years worth of work of writing stories and putting this together and then going through the publication process. So I thank you all for being here to help me celebrate it. I'm going to read 2 short pieces from the book, and then we'll have a little chat. So this first piece is called The Skins. And even though we're not all in the same room, I want us all to do something together, which is we're all going to clap one time. So when I count down from 3, I want everyone to clap their hands once. I promise it'll make sense. And it's really fun to clap your hands if you haven't tried it. So 3, 2, 1. All right, The Skins. The producer wanted wet hands, sweaty and tense to where the sound really snapped. So my team detained the clappers in an overwarm anteroom beside the recording booth. We made them wait. Clammy, anxious, beating on the soundproof door. We're still in here. Eventually they were released, palms moist, only to find their mark at the mic and fail her. Each time the producer sighed. The perfect clap was somewhere far off, but she assured my team and I, reachable. She wanted trim nails, short fingers. I need compact percussion. At noon, she called the bassist hand clap languorous. I need hands that don't take all day to come together. We brought in children, but they had no strength. We brought in brawny wrestlers, varsity, but rhythmless. And even though I could have made it match the beat in post, the producer wanted someone with an intuition she could sense, a soul she could hear on tape. She wanted my team to stop bickering. A chat about the proper pop filter had spiraled into a dispute over whether, in a finger snap, the sound was in the friction between the thumb and middle finger, or rather in the finger striking the palm. Battle lines were drawn, mapping neatly onto two worldviews, neither of which the producer was interested in exploring right now. Thank you very much. An intern was let go. What if you just do the clap yourself? I asked her, trying to distract from the episode. We'd probably have it in like one take. But this song was part of her Selfless series, records with pages and pages of credits. One is only built from a pile of others, read the pull quote from her Vibe interview, even though the album art was always front and back, full bleed headshots of the producer's stoic pout. No, Ziegler, she said. She loved to put a touch of Dutch on the pronunciation of my name, even though I had never stepped foot in Europe. She had her own engineer in every country and refused to fly me out for tour. It's not my role to clap, she said, pressing the delete key to erase an entire track. So I brought in music students who cupped their hands in exotic ways. It didn't take. We got creative, idiotic. We had a policeman fire a gun, blanks, but still, it sounds forced, she said. One by one, my team began to flee, talking of union contracts, families, the sour taste left over from the finger snap debacle. It's getting dark, they said. Outside, too. Hours meant nothing. What were hours? The coming lump sum would float my team through another summer. The payday was out there somewhere, invisible, but within grasp. Marcus and I had decided not to adopt until I was established, until my name was a stock you could trade. You're getting all their information, right? The producer asked from inside her stress-relieving VR headset. The failures, I mean. I need each one credited. Yes, I assured her. And then I went to make more calls. Calls until my phone died. I wandered down the street, past the cafe, past the poke bowl place, past the new lofts, and into the barber school. They didn't seem to understand my request, but I left an address. One man set down his scissors and even shook my hand. The producer ate dinner, a family-sized bag of peanut M&Ms right there at the soundboard. What she'd do is she'd suck the candy down to its furrowed core, pinch the nut from her tongue, and stack each one beside the mixer. And it was times like these that I'd try to break a clipboard with my hands. I'm still working on it. Perfection to me is a pile of trying. The pile grows high enough to be enough. You know, Ziegler, she said, I'm not paying you for an opinion. And before I could sulk away to send some emails, she softened, turned to me, and confessed that perfection was immortal. Omnipotent, yet quotidian, she said, like finding a dropped dollar. And I said, more like 1 million of them all at once. Our only agreement was that the hand clap is the supreme snare. No drum, acoustic or digital, sounds immaculate as that, two hands brought together. To this day, I get a little kick anytime someone calls a set of drums the Skins. When the barbers arrived, the producer was sugar crashed on the couch, face down, so I led the session, instructing them through the microphone. Just clap, I said, forgetting to hit record, and the 4 men began to applaud. My team was gone, so I cracked up all alone. My laughter woke the producer, who stood and leaned over the board watching as these men kept clapping. Who are these people? Barbers, I said. She touched the red button to capture their ovation. They work with their hands, she said, raising her arms above her head. A victory, a stretch. The song, you'll notice, is totally snareless. No claps, no snaps, no pillars prop up its structure. It marks the start of her formless phase. You can hear a thread throughout, soft in the background, applause like rain. And if you scroll through the credits, you'll find me buried there beneath a sea of names. Thank you. And I'm imagining the applause, and it sounds beautiful. Thank you. I am going to read the opening story of the collection. Actually, not the whole story. I'm just going to read the beginning of the opening story. So to give you a taste of what one of the longer stories is like. So this book has longer stories around like 20 pages throughout it. And then it also is kind of broken up throughout with these short stories like the one I just read, which I call flash fiction. So anyway, this is one of the longer stories. I'm going to read just like the first section of it. This is the first story in the book. It's called Once Nothing, Twice Shatter. Luther buys cars. It's what he does. It's what his billboard says he does. Luther buys cars. He bought my dad's car. He bought the mayor's car. He came to a surprise party for my mom's 65th and left with her Sportage. Think back, if you lived in Gettysburg in the late aughts, Luther probably bought your car. Maybe you heard about him on TV about what he built and you thought, I would never sell that man my car. I'm sorry, I don't believe it. It's his aura. He's got the smile like the grill of a Chrysler, hair a horse's mane. Luther glowed gold. I was en route to leaving town, to finding peace, to ridding my life of so much me, when I crashed into the back of an Integra, transfixed by the riddle of its vanity plate. He'd die for you. My brakes tried. Our cars veered into the cornfield. The other driver's baby cried as we waited for the police, and it was raining, pouring, and my door wouldn't open, and Luther appeared bearing an umbrella and a guarantee my Buick was totaled, bereft, unsound. With his big vocab, that quiet murmur, the cleft lip scar, you just hung on to Luther's every word. I was cold, high, and scared, but his serenity kept me from fleeing deep into the corn. Luther went, shh, and then he bought my Buick. I'm notarized, he said, and shook my hand with both of his. So warm. It's all legitimate. So I left my 11 books on Zen in the trunk, took my hamper, and walked to Wawa. I bought so much made to order, enough to kill a horse, as they say. Mozzarella sticks for pumps 2 through 8, I told the cashier, sopping. Luther had made me magnanimous. I thought it was my middle-aged life turning over like an antique engine. I thought it was my middle-aged life turning over like an antique engine. That night, I got a nose ring. Not that Luther was pierced, but his high-tier moxie made the world feel like something you could bring to heal. Luther bought my car for $300, but then I had nowhere to live. After the accident, I stopped wearing the hat that a fan had made me, a red mesh trucker embroidered with the words Brad the Broadcast Bandit. It had been 2 years since my Shock Jock radio show, and I'd been going by a slew of dumb identities. Greg, Jed, Art, Hal, any name that sounded burped. Todd. I started living in the yard behind my dealer's double wide. Basically, it was a doomsday shelter dug by shovel and lined with 10-pound bags of rice. That's where I slept, on rice bag beds, and I cut this guy's grass, loaded his little dishwasher on wheels, and kept his cats alive. His name was, I'll call him Colt. I owed Colt a lot of money, and he had dirt on me too. Don't just do something, Colt would say. Sit there, which meant do something. And then he'd hop on one of his crotch rockets and tear off into the afternoon. While he was out, I'd clean his trailer and I'd clean his girlfriend's trailer. I'd clean his other girlfriend's trailer and then I'd clean her girlfriend's trailer. And I would think about a billboard that said Todd cleans trailers. At first, I figured I might get empty this way, cleaning all day alone. What I wanted was to make my ego go quiet, to learn to think of nothing but the dish when I rinsed it. But then one morning with the radio on, I got lost in my head and snapped a porcelain plate. Then I smashed a glass. Then I whipped the squawking radio at a ceiling fan and left. So I tried Mom again, walked all the way to her house, offered to cook and clean for a spot on the couch. She lived in an unaffordable split level that would soon be repossessed because the loans had been written in a language the country no longer spoke. In 2009, that was the story of Adams County, the elegy of the country, really. Homes being pulled out from under us like rugs. Mom raised honeybees and wasn't fond of taking off her aerated beekeeping veil. She looked like an outer space nun. Through the mesh, she told me my problem was that I didn't know how to blame myself for anything. I had to start doing right. But I don't want to do anything, I said. That's the point. I want to want nothing. You're hearing this, she said, turning to her hives. You see what I'm talking about? I told her I was becoming a wandering monk. I threatened to join the US Army. I even gave her a hug. What about that nice man, Luther, she said. I hear he's hiring guys like you. Cars, yes, but it turns out Luther had also bought land. So much land, enough land to kill a horse. In May, trucks drove over to spread dirt into an oval. It was a track. That's why he bought our cars, to stock a demolition derby. Even miles away in town, you could hear vehicles collapsing into one another. And that's when I came to Luther for a job, holding my hands out like a cup, empty. Piles of busted rubber tires fenced the track, and I entered slowly, passing teams of men wrenching Jeeps with gusto. In his shed, I sat on a red fender and told Luther to make me a driver, a derby man, a dead-to-the-world heel on the gas. With enough impact, I'd smash the grasping clean out of my body like a pair of dumb dice through a shattered windshield. Luther rocked in his racing seat, prayer hands pressed to his marked lip, eyes shut in one long blink. He wore a white tank top you could see his dog tag necklace through. I poked at an eraser on the table between us. There wasn't one light on, but the tool shed shone. Finally, he said, "Todd, you consume drugs, correct?" "What can I say?" I twisted my nose ring, smelling the sour of my cartilage. "Youth." We laughed at that. I was 40, and the hole was infected. "Substances deliver you a kind of orgasm, yes?" Luther said, every word a whisper. I shrugged and did not say, "Yeah, man, they used to. They once helped me see all the way to God." "Todd, the goal is to be in a state of perpetual," he said, pointing to his temple, "orgasm." I laughed. "And that's why we're creating the track," Luther said. When he handed me a paper, I thought it was his manifesto. He told me to read it aloud. "Anybody know what this place is? This is Gettysburg. This is where they fought the Battle of Gettysburg. 50,000 men died right here fighting the same fight that we're still fighting amongst ourselves today. This green field painted red, bubbling with the blood of young boys, smoke and hot lead pouring right through their bodies. Listen to their souls. I killed my brother with malice in my heart. Hatred destroyed my family. Listen, take a lesson from the dead." For a second, I felt heroic. I couldn't put my finger on the film the words were from, but it felt like one where when people fall down, they keep getting back up and keep getting back up. "I'll employ you as my anchor man," Luther said. "You'll narrate the races, remind the crowd precisely why they're here, why they want to return." I shook my head no. Airtime was the one drug I could not do anymore. If you're listening to this, you know I've relapsed. Remember the Titans? That was the movie. And Luther was a titan, a tycoon, and a tyrant to be. I heard people outside the shed laughing, saw us coughing into metal. Luther stood up from his cockpit, came around the table, and put his hands on my shoulders. I shivered, but it felt holy. "Can't I just clean the dirt?" I asked. "You've got to be somebody before you can be nobody," Luther said, pulling an I-9 from a glove compartment nailed to the wall. Had he been reading my old mystic books? In his words, I heard Thich Nhat Hanh and bits of Be Here Now. Ideas rang familiar but newly bold, glossy, like chrome. Luther handed me the form. I read it aloud, but Luther wouldn't laugh until I signed. Thank you. So that is the opening of that story, and it goes, it gets weirder from there. So.
All right, that was so wonderful. Thank you so much, Tyler. That was, I think, a really amazing introduction to this book. And some of the, I think, my favorite parts about this book are both, I love that I've underlined in here, you look like an outer space nun. And I think throughout there is just like some really amazing imagery. Later on, you compare fingers to chopped up hot dogs. So like, yeah, I think throughout I was like really struck by your imagery. Before we get into the real craft stuff about this book, I wanted to talk about a couple of things that come up in both of the pieces that you read, which is the role of, I'll say, community. And so many of your characters seem like they're outsiders who are looking for some kind of community, some type of like place where they can be accepted. I mean, in The Skins, we have our narrator who was like within this song, but also like way at the bottom, we learn at the very end. And then when we're introduced to Todd, we see someone who is wanting to get involved with something much bigger, almost spiritual, I think, by the time that we get to the end of this story. Whether or not that's a good thing, we'll find out. But can you talk a little bit about the role of, like, what drew you to writing about characters who were searching for community like this?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because when I first put this book of stories together, I'll admit I didn't really know what it was that made them all belong. I kind of pretended for a while that I knew, and I had some kind of highfalutin ideas about what connected all of these stories, but it took a little bit of searching until I figured out that, and multiple revisions of the book, that I realized that the book is really, to me, about home. And the sections of the book are kind of about it's like characters who have lost a home and are looking for a new one, or characters who are thinking about leaving a home. So it's often these liminal spaces about where they're finding home. And so to me, community is home, and I've found home since leaving the town that I grew up in. I found home mostly through other people, through community, especially around writing. So yeah, I like that you bring that word into it, because that is what a lot of the characters are like, either searching for or trying to figure out how to transcend, really, or like reconcile with. So but yeah, it's one of those things where like I didn't really know I was writing about it until I was able to step back from the collection and see it in a new light. One of the things that helped me with that actually was and I'm reading about this for an essay that's coming out soon, but one of the things that helped with that was finding what became the epigraph of the book. So the epigraph is the little quote that's at the very beginning, and the epigraph is, "I like feeling at home, but I wish I didn't feel it here." And that's by one of my favorite writers, Mary Robeson, a short story she wrote called In Jewel. So when I was rereading Mary Robeson for inspiration, I saw that line and I was like, oh, that is so good. Why do I feel so charged by that line? And it made me think about my collection in a way that where I thought about home. And I was like, oh yeah, that's really what my book is about. And I was no longer afraid to put it simply that it was a book about home. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. But
yeah, I mean, I want to even add a little bit more to that based on what you were just saying, and especially bringing in that epigraph, because I'm thinking even of Sabrina. I'm forgetting the name of the story, but where her mom has early onset Alzheimer's, and that seems like especially in conversation with that Robeson piece, or that Robeson line, or Stego, which is the story that we worked on together when I was editing at Gulf Coast, which is really all about like, how do we find this home, and what happens when we have a home but we don't really like that we're there. Like it's really interesting that you have these outsiders who are looking for home, but sometimes you have a space where the outsiders have a home but they're like, oh, like I can't believe this is where I'm stuck, right? So what do you think is interesting about that, like internal conflict of a home? Like what really made you want to write about that?
yeah, I think
I'm
it's
hoping this isn't the same terrain that you talked about. I think it's, yeah.
sure. Yeah, I think what's most interesting to me about it is it's kind of a it's kind of the story of everything, really. It's like the things you want, you get them, and then you realize they're not like solving all of your problems. So like if if a character is like trying to decide whether or not they should leave their home, what's interesting to me is the current running through that is that like the problems that they're dealing with aren't going to be solved by moving. There's like a couple of characters who are trying to decide whether they should leave for like a new opportunity, or kind of leave in more of like an escape of where they're living. And we're drawn to this like action of life of like, well, if I move here and start a new life, or if I put these plot turns into my life, like things might change. And they do, but you're still essentially the same person, still have the same restlessness. So I think it's a lot of restless characters. And I feel like that's probably I have really enjoyed my 20s. I just turned 30 this year, but I was certainly restless a lot throughout that, and always thinking of like, well, this is what I have right now, I like and I appreciate and I'm lucky to have, but like thinking about what might be the next thing. And I mean, to say that it makes sense. Like this summer I just moved like what was it? Yeah, like I moved a long way away from where I was living just this summer, in kind of a quick month. And I think it was the right decision, and I'm happy to be here in the Adirondacks. But it's indicative of like, when you read the book, you'll see there are lots of characters who are deciding whether or not they should stay or go. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I want to talk a little bit more about the process of putting together a story collection. As you said early on, after you finished reading, that the collection both includes longer, like 20, 25 page stories, while also a lot of flash fiction. I think that can make it, that's a really risky, and I think you pulled it off really well, move to have a story collection that has so many varying lengths. So what went into your decisions to like create a collection that had so many varying lengths? And how did you sort of get to the point where you knew that the stories that maybe were short? How did you order this collection essentially?
Yeah, that's a good question. I what do I want to say about this? Sorry, I'm having a moment. Yeah, this book is like the kind of book that I want to read. Like I really enjoy short stories, and I love short story collections. Some of my favorite books are story collections, and a lot of times the trend with story collections was to have 12 stories, maybe 11 stories that are all 15 to 20 pages long, and then there's one story in there that's like 1 page long to like show that the writer can write at different lengths. I can think of lots of books like that, and there's nothing wrong with those books, but I always loved that mixing up, because for me, going through a story collection, I like there to be differences in lengths between the stories, and I get a little bit you could start to like kind of feel the patterns of stories, and it becomes predictable maybe. So I don't know, it's just I kind of want to make the things that I would want to read if I wasn't me, I guess. So this book is that. There's like, if there's a long story, there's usually a really like a break between the next long story with another really short piece. I've seen lots of collections in the last few years mix long and short stories, 1 page stories to 25-page stories. But I don't really know. I mean, I'm not saying I'm certainly not the first to do this, but that most of the times when I see those mixing of lengths, it's a couple of different pieces. And this book is like, I think every story in it is a different length. Like it's kind of all over the map, and there's 20 stories in here. So it's really kind of also telling the story of my growth as a writer and my ability to like experiment in different modes. And I think that I think some readers will find that they connect more with longer stories where they can sit with the characters for longer times. But I like to think of the shorter little pieces that are 1 or 2 pages as almost like prose poems, and showing that what I care most about it is like language and the line level of story writing. So I really wanted to get that across, even if it doesn't work for everybody. I'm saying that only because of like thinking of the few reviews of the book, which have been very positive, but have like made a note of like, there's some like really short stories in here that I don't really get, and I'm like not offended by that. I knew that it would be different, but I'm proud of it. And I really love flash fiction. So I'm glad that it's represented pretty heavily in this book. There's like, I think 7 stories that are all under like 4 pages. So yeah.
No, it was really great going through the collection and having those little like, I think variation is just a really wonderful thing to have in a book, right? And that's something that I'm always looking for, different kinds of textures in a book. And I think that you do that really nicely here, right? You're like capable of doing the nice like 15-page like story, but you're also able to have something that is just like extremely lyrical and sort of image based, which I think is really great to have that kind of variation. I want to ask a little bit about I mean, all writers can't just write about writing. And I think that you do a good job of not doing that. But I was sensing a real interest in creation throughout this collection, right? I mean, you read from The Skins, which is really about music. There's another story about a woman who creates like elaborate mailbox art. And then later on, again, I mean, the story that I clearly was most obsessed with, Sabrina talking about her Black Sands, right, is the name of that story. Right. Talking about her mother who has early onset Alzheimer's. She's telling this story to her boyfriend about what happened to her, an accident that happened to her mother. And he tells her at one point, you get better at telling it. And she says, you just mean it's each time it's shorter. And he responds, no, you get more to the heart of it. And I want to talk about how you were relating with the question of art making throughout this book, and what was driving you to write about characters. I mean, I especially think of the woman who's making the mailboxes is someone who's dealing with a real profound grief, right? And that seems to be what is leading to this creative process. So can you talk a little bit about how your characters are dealing actively with the creative process throughout the book?
For sure. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up. I haven't talked about this with anybody yet. And if it's something that's being picked up on this book, I think my work moving forward, like any of the projects that I'm currently embedded with are like very heavily me wanting to write about people who are interested in making things because they find meaning in making things, and especially people who find meaning in making things that nobody else cares about. And that is probably telling on myself a little bit of like being a short story writer, because being a writer is not, a rock star career to begin with, but then to write like kind of weird, brash short stories and flash fiction, it's even more kind of like off to the side. So those kind of like anxieties have certainly fed into my work, but I don't like to write about like a writer. I'm not sure that I've done that, but I probably will at some point. I will like give up on trying to like mask these ideas in like, oh, it's not a writer, it's a woman who makes mailboxes that are shaped like famous pieces of architecture, like falling water, and that's this in the story breakthrough mailboxes, like you were saying. And there's a lot of characters through here who are making art or like interested in art in some way, but I'm also just really inspired by all kinds of art. And most of my friends are artists in some way, if they're writers or photographers or painters and I've worked a number of jobs where I'm working closely with artists. So I'm just very kind of plugged into that world, and nothing makes me like more happy than to like sit around with other people who make things, even if it's not writing, but and talk about kind of like how hard it is and how bad we have it, just to kind of like gripe and stuff about it and tell stories that nobody else would understand, because you're kind of speaking the same language of rejection and of like imposter syndrome and being ignored and things like that. So that comes through in the collection a lot. But I also think because there's something really rich to me in the fact that somebody would want to create something, especially if they're even kind of aware that it's not something that a lot of people want. They don't really have an audience, but they keep making the thing because they just need to do it. I was just talking today with my boss, Natalie, about how much I love being at open mics. Even if like an open mic is like going poorly in whatever that means, like I just love to be in a room where people are up on stage and like sharing like what they care about, even if it isn't something that everyone else in the room is currently caring about or something. Like I just love the honesty of that and like being open about this means something to me, even if you don't understand it, and I want to put it out in the world. That kind of energy just really ignites my creativity for sure. So currently writing lots of different artists who are doing weird projects. I also think it's a way for me to like pretend that being an artist, it's like, or a visual artist, it's like, instead of going and trying to learn how to be a sculptor or something, I can write a story about somebody who's sculpting these weird things. Or if I have a cool idea for a project that an artist could do, instead of wasting my life trying to figure out how to do it, I can just like make a story about it that no one will read. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Anyway,
that is the life hack. Just become a writer so that you can actually do everything.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Don't build the sculpture, just write about the sculpture.
Yeah. And then you can control everyone's responses to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. No, that's great. No, that's really interesting to hear, right? And I think just how we're all sort of dealing with, I mean, these ideas are on our mind all the time, right? So like, even if you're not like intentionally engaging with questions of like creation, I'm sure it's there, right? Like, especially like obscure creation and stuff like that, which those are the types of things that I'm always like really, really interested in. And like, Lydia Davis is always writing about those things and thinking like, what was that old Stephen Milhauser story, like the Master of Miniatures or something like that? That's also one about like an obscure creation of like a tiny thing that seems like about creation, which is always really great. Similar to creation, the creation of the world in 7 days / religion. I want to talk a little bit about the role of spirituality in this book. You read from this opening story, we get a little bit of it. We start to see instances of Luther being a little bit like a spiritual leader. Eventually he turns into something almost like a cult leader in that story. And I see that the beginning arc of this book, or the arc that you start to draw in this book, is like starting with community almost gone wrong, right? Like someone desperate to join and then ends up in a bad place. Whereas once we get to the end of this book, spacing on we have both the church at the end where we have our narrator working. We also have the final story, which is quite literally a spiritual introduction to the neighborhood, right? And the spiritual becomes less about almost the cultish or the scammy to a kind of like almost non-religious, just like vibey spirituality. So can you talk about the arc that you wanted to create in this book and why that was important to you and how it relates to all the things we've talked about?
Yeah. You know, when you asked earlier about ordering the stories, I didn't really talk about that too much. But the book I saw in being these three sections of like people losing home or community, people looking for home and community, like a new one, and then these stories at the end of people having a home or a community and like still there not being something quite right with, like still this irritable grasping towards like there's some way that this could be better. So I didn't really think about spirituality in terms of like bookending the book with opening with a story that's a bit about Eastern spirituality. It's influenced by like my thinking. This Once Nothing Twice Shatter is influenced by me listening to lots of Ram Dass podcasts and reading lots of like kind of Zen books, which I am genuinely interested in, and like to think of myself as somebody who lives by some of those principles, even though I find it very hard to do, to be mindful and to accept the world as it is. But I was thinking about a character there who would take those ideas and then use them wrong, like just because every idea, I feel like so many cults are like, is like a good idea that some with the wrong person gets in their hands and it goes south. And I was like, could that have happened with Ram Dass too? Like someone who's just like very chill and funny. Like, could somebody have taken his ideas and then just been like a sociopath? And obviously, yes, that could happen. And that's kind of where that story came from. And I think spirituality, because it's an interest of mine, especially through some of these like Eastern ideas and especially around mindfulness and Zen, they kind of come and go throughout the book. And then at the end, I think you're right to point out that the final story is called Spiritual Introduction to the Neighborhood. And it is really the way I like to see the world, which is that I feel like I'm interacting with, I feel like the easiest way for me to like interact with, if you want to call it God, or if you want to call it the energy that created the universe, or something that makes me feel like not totally alone, it's just from noticing things around me. And I know that sounds like you said, vibey and a little bit woo-woo, but like I feel the most like in touch with like the now and with whatever my current idea of God is when I'm like walking through a neighborhood and like noticing the things that are in my neighborhood. And that's kind of what that story is. Like it goes street by street as this older man is kind of reflecting on his neighborhood and giving you a tour of it in a sense. But it's also, that's another story of like of a character reaching for an audience. And that's how that's the kind of idea at the end of the story too, is like that he has all of these things to say about his neighborhood, all these things that feel really charged with meaning, even if he couldn't write like a scholarly essay about why his neighborhood is so important. He just knows all of these details are really important and wants to share them with someone, and is like kind of desperate for an audience. And I won't spoil like how he reaches for that audience. But anyway, so yeah, I think that shows a good arc, because the last story is more my understanding of spirituality, whereas like the first story is very much like there's like literal quotes from Ram Dass in that, and in that story, and it used to have an epigraph of a Ram Dass quote as well. So yeah, it's kind of like shows some of my influences. And then towards the end of the book, with those last two stories really shows where I currently, how I understand it for myself. Yeah, so thanks for asking that.
Yeah, of course. No, both Ramdas and Coach Boone, right? So
right.
yeah, so two major pillars in world affairs.
Yeah,
So let's
there's a book there.
actually, I want to move to Q&A in a
Sure.
minute here. Did you want to do another small reading before we move to audience Q&A?
I do, just because it means so much to me,
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
story.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of a fun one. It's 1 page long, so it won't be long, everyone. But it's called Midtown, and the story is fiction, but like I wrote a lot of notes while being at I write notes all the time when I'm at readings, but I was saying before about how inspired I'm at readings, and I've gone to Midtown Scholar many times in my life to see readings, to do open mics, to watch my wife perform on the stage, and it's just a place that means a lot to me. So this is a story that came out of that. I think it's fun, a little bit sad and funny, and it's indicative of the whole book, I think. So it's called Midtown. The poet mopped the floor with us. The poet opened up like a corner sky and fell on us. The poet felled us. The lights flickered. No drinks were ordered. Nobody rose for the pisser. The poet, a warned about force, put everything internal up for sale, actually for free, on the front porch of their voice. And we carried all we could handle home. For days, we walked slower for how the poet had made us feel about trees. We just needed to touch every trunk, rub the leaves, smell our hands, compose dark, sloppy emails about how it all felt. Emails we then sent to the poet, who never responded, but did post online that they were not in a good place mentally, and then apologized for transgressions no one in that poet's life remembered. A picture of our sorry faces was even taken for the paper, and the headline said, "The tops of these people's heads have been taken off by a poet." And of course, we read the article and we shared it, clipped it out, pinned it up at work, and watched it watch us wither, all the while turning over the article's pull quote. I think a poem is a dig site. I'm talking archaeological. There's some shit down there, the poet said. And I just want one other thing on the record. I'm sorry I couldn't get through the book signing without crying. I don't know what's wrong with me. We promised our loved ones, though of course later we failed, that we would never forget how the poet had trounced us. The night of the reading, we'd eaten dinner early or out or alone as usual, just to be on time for our trouncing. After all, we had come to be trounced, and we had been hurt well and good, had been dunked on. We had, by the poet, been altered. Our hands still sting from the applause. We didn't know when to clap, and then we didn't know when to stop. Thank you.
All right. So we have a couple audience questions here. So let's say this one comes from Daniel. What did putting this collection together teach you about yourself as a writer? What will you know for the next one that you didn't know when you started this process?
Wow, that's great. What it taught me was that even if I don't know what it is that my work is about, like, what do you write about? What is this book about? How will we sell this book? How will you write jacket copy for this book? Even if I don't know those things, like, the things I'm writing are about something, and it just takes me a while to figure out what they are. I wish I could be a writer who is inspired by something and thinks, I want to write a story about X that explores this issue and explains and like tackles some of the problems I see in this issue, and maybe sheds new light on it from my perspective, like, and like can make an outline for how they're going to kind of approach it from like the way you might write a 5-paragraph essay or something. I don't think anyone actually writes that way, to be for real, but I do not write that way at all. I write where I get a sentence that I like, I either overhear or it kind of comes into my head, and I just start with that sentence and just go. And sometimes it's really hard and really messy because I don't know what the point is, where I'm going with it. If it just feels right, and I don't know how else to put it, if it just feels right, I'll just keep writing until that energy dissipates. And for these 20 stories that are in this book, there are, there's 3 times as many other ones that I did finish and I do like, but are not as, they're not like at this level. And then there's 10 times that they're in this folder on my computer called abandoned, that are just like, I got energy on a project and started writing, and then I lost it, and I don't know how to get that energy back. And even if I sat down and wrote an outline for, I got to write this scene, I got to write this scene, I got to write this scene, I just really, at this point in my life, can't really write that way. I would like to at some point. As I'm working on a novel, I'm finding it's going to be harder and harder to just write sentence by sentence and have everything work out eventually. But that's what I learned, was to kind of just trust myself, that even if I don't know what I'm doing, I do know on some deeper level, and it'll make itself clear when the time's right. So, yeah.
Excellent. I mean, I think this is a little bit related. So can you talk a little bit about your writing process? When and where and how do you do your best writing?
Sure. My process is, well, I keep this, I take notes throughout the day, all the time, in different notes on my phone in the notes app. I have one for like the current story I'm working on. I have one just called poetic shit, and it's like lines that just sound good, but I don't know what they mean or what I'll do with them, and I probably will never do anything. Another one called epigraphs, which is longer than any of them. They're all just quotes that I take from books I'm reading, or movies, or songs that I'm like, oh man, if I could write a book where this was the epigraph, it would be so great. And that document's really long too. So when I sit down to write and I don't know what it is I'm working on, I just open up those notes and pull something out, usually a sentence, and I start there and see if I can see if that sentence can lead to the next one, and see if it just keeps piling on. Sometimes those stories end up being only a paragraph long or a page long, and they feel right to end there. And sometimes they go to be 25 pages or 100 pages of a messy thing that might one day be a novel. So I really do try to not plan. The only thing that I plan is when to write, and I write, as cliche as it sounds, I write every morning. We get up pretty early, and even if I can just get 45 minutes at the computer, then I'm usually happy for the day. And it's more like an exercise of anything, just to ease anxiety, because like throughout the day I'll be like, oh, I haven't written today, or I'm not a writer anymore. So if I just like do that in the morning, even if it's crap, I still feel like I like worked out in a way, So that's my process. Once a story gets closer and closer to being done, a big part of my process is sharing it with other writers who I trust, and workshopping, and going through lots and lots of editing. So as messy and like intuitional as my writing process is, where I'm really trying to just focus on the words on the page and not over control what's happening too much and just let it come out. Then as I'm editing and revising, it's a completely different thing. It's very difficult and ruthless, and like I want to send it to my friend P or my friend Dennis and have them totally tear it apart, or show it to Erin and have her tear it apart, and like then go back and fix the things and make the piece better. So editing and revising is a whole nother story, but just drafting is and putting words on the page it's so much fun. That's like what that's what it's all about. I like that more than anything. So
Right, so let's end, we're almost out of time, so let's do one last question. This comes from Beth. Can you talk about some of your favorite authors or stories? Who has most inspired you to write? And I will just add a little bit to this. Who were you most in conversation with when writing this book?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Beth and Alex. I am inspired by so many story collections, most notably the writers like Lori Moore and Amy Hempel. I also am really like so many people who look like me, a real big fan of George Saunders, and he's one of the people who made me want to go pursue writing and actually go to a program and really take this stuff seriously. So yes, those are great, but I don't think any book has like hit me as hard as We the Animals by Justin Torres. That is not a story collection, but it's a novel. It's a short novel written in what I would call stories. They're all very short as well, which is very instructive to my writing, and gave me permission to like write lots of short stories, like 3 or 4 page stories, and just go with it and know that it was allowed and it was good. Not as good as We the Animals, which I think is like a modern classic. But the other book I want to point out that not a lot of people talk about, I really love the book Miguel Street by V.S. Naipaul. And I actually discovered it through a story that my English teacher had us read and write an essay about when I was a senior in high school. And after reading one of the stories from that book, I went and got that book, and I read it many times in college, and I gave it to lots of friends and stuff. The voice in those stories and the just the simplicity of the writing, how it really, those stories get to the heart of like, they're not super literary or fancy in the way they're written. They're written in a very direct language. They're written like in the voices of characters who really feel like they live in this community. And all of the people on the street like get that it's called Miguel Street, and you can kind of imagine the street, and there's all these people living in fairly low income neighborhood, and they're just each getting their own story, and their stories kind of crisscross. And it's a beautiful way to do a linked story collection, and it was really influential to me for sure. So those are some of the best. But I also say everyone should read Mary Ruefle. She's a poet, and she's like my favorite writer for the last few years, and probably responsible for the fact that my work keeps getting more and more poetic and less narrative and more like follow your intuition. I love her. So everyone should read Mary Ruefle. She's great. And is that it? Yeah. What's my book in conversation with? I would like to think of my book in conversation with another really great collection, Kevin Wilson's first short story collection, which is, I don't know why I'm blanking on it. I love it so much. Megan Phillips will probably say what it is called, but Kevin Wilson's first short story collection is so good. Yes.
Tunneling to the Center of the Earth.
Yes, Tunneling to the Center.
That is what we're getting from the chat. From
Right,
Megan
okay.
Phillips. Yeah.
Thank you, Megan. I can't believe I blanked on that. I looked at the clock and I was like, oh God, it's almost 8, and I stopped being able to think. I think the book is I think that because I love the way that he writes like ridiculous things. Like his books are ridiculous and weird, but are still believable, and they don't feel like fantasy. And not that there's anything wrong with fantasy, but I tend to like steer away from fantasy and go towards more like weird realism or ridiculous realism. And I think Kevin Wilson was very instructive in that. And I was super happy to have him blurb the book as well. And yeah, so I think that answers the question. And thanks for the question. That was great.
Of course. We have so many other great questions, but we are unfortunately out of time. The other Alex is here.
Yeah. We've got to wrap up, but Tyler, congrats.
Yes.
Here it is,
Thanks
Eternal
so much.
Night at the Nature Museum. For everyone out there, if you have not yet purchased your copy, you can purchase it through the Midtown Scholar Bookstore. Visit our website, come to us in store, or just get it from your local indie, but just get it. Thank you to our audience members. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you to Alex for being our interviewer this evening. And I'd just like to kick it back to you, Tyler. Do you have any last words for our audience?
Just thank you so much for helping me celebrate this. I thought that it might not feel as warm as it does being virtual, but I feel very loved and welcomed. And so I thank everybody for being here, and to you too for both being involved in this.
You're welcome.
No, congratulations again, Tyler.
Thank you.
An incredible book.
Awesome.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
See ya.
See ya.